We'll see if anyone else trickles in, but I'll start. And what I want to do is I want to play a clip first of one of Tallis's most famous pieces. All right. So we are gathered here tonight to talk about Thomas Tallis, who was born sometime around 1505 and lived a hearty almost 80 years. So, which was a long time during that. He's often referred to as the father of English church music. And there you see a picture of him, which may or may not represent what he actually looked like. But there he is when he was younger. And there are two of his signatures that that they have on record.
What are we looking at there, Kevin?
Just his signature. See him?
No.
Or
Does anybody else see it?
How he signed his music. Can you see the document? Let me share it again. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry. So Tallis, this is a likeness, or maybe not, of him, but that's what that's one of the only pictures that we have, and there are the signatures that we have on record of him. As I said, he was born sometime between 1500 and 1520, usually stated as 1505, and probably born in Kent, England. He might have been a child or boy soprano of the Chapel Royal, or might have sung at Canterbury Cathedral as a boy. We know that he sung there later as a man. As a composer, he served the court under 4 monarchs, and this is going to become important later when we look at his music. Henry VIII, Edward VI, Mary I, and Queen Elizabeth I. He was capable of switching the style of his compositions to suit each monarch's different demands. The author and composer Ernest Walker wrote that he had more versatility of style than Tye and White, and his general handling of his material was more consistently easy and certain. And as I said, this is going to become very evident later when we study the different periods of his life when he was working for a different monarch and how he was able to just switch almost overnight to what that monarch required. Tallis taught the composer William Byrd, and the two are generally mentioned in the same breath. Byrd and Tallis, both kind of the same time period, and we'll see that they had a monopoly on printing, so they're often mentioned together. Tallis's employment in the Chapel Royal probably began in 1543 when he was appointed organist. And Chapel Royal was kind of the court musicians for the monarchy, except they just sang and for services. Now, in 1575, Queen Elizabeth I granted Tallis and Byrd a 21-year monopoly for polyphonic music and a patent to print and publish set song or songs in parts, one of the first arrangements of its kind in England. He had exclusive rights to print any music in any language, and he and Byrd had sole use of the paper used in printing music. However, during their lifetime, their music did not sell well as people distrusted Roman Catholics. So as Vince talked about earlier, both Byrd and Tallis were Catholic, and Byrd kind of stayed true to his faith throughout his life, whereas Tallis was able to adapt a little bit easier. Late in his life, Tallis lived in Greenwich and was buried in the chancel of the parish of St. Alfge Church in Greenwich. So that's just a little overview of his life and kind of the main points. Now, I wanted to talk about his works in chronological order. And we first start with which monarch he worked for first, which was Henry VIII. Henry VIII ruled from 1509 to 1547, and his break from Rome was in 1534. So during that time, Tallis wrote these pieces. When you look at these pieces, note the language. The first four are in Latin, and then these two, the English litany obviously is in English, and the Mass is also in Latin. So primarily Latin church music that was very similar to the Catholic music of the time. His early works suggest the influence of composers John Tavener and Robert Fairfax. Tavener in particular is quoted in Salve Intemerata Virgo, one of his pieces, and his later work Dum Transiset Sabitum, which the choir sings for Easter sometimes. So I wanted to listen to one of these pieces and just note the style of the work and the language, and whether or not there are a lot of melismas, which mean that there is a lot of notes per syllable or single notes per syllable. So hopefully you can see this video here. This is a choir called Blue Heron, which is based up in the Northeast. And this piece is by Tallis called Ave Rosa Sine Spinis. Oops, sorry. Some things. Screen shares being.
Bots are attacking you, Kevin.
Yeah, I know. Let me try it again. I'll just stop it there. Did you get that clip? Did you hear some of that?
Mhm.
Did you notice how there were one or two, I think there were only two voices. There was a low voice sung by the men, and then there was this more florid line sung by the women on top. And they were almost only singing one or two syllables for a ton of notes. And this is kind of the more old-fashioned way of composing at the beginning of Tallis's lifetime. So just kind of remember that when you listen to some of the other things early on. This is very florid, and this kind of polyphony was very specific to the English school. So if you listen to Palestrina from Italy or Victoria from Spain, a little bit different than what the English had going on. This kind of stratospheric stuff going on with the women's voices and these two lines going is very characteristic for the English. Okay.
Are they contemporaries, Palestrina? Are they, what is it, 16th century?
Yes, but I'm not sure if it's exact. Exact contemporaries. Yeah. Now, after Henry VIII dies, we move on to the reign of Edward VI, who reigned from 1547 to 1553. And the church then had a reformed Anglican liturgy. We got to remember that Henry didn't actually want to change the liturgy when he broke from Rome. So a lot of the liturgy in the beginning of the early days of the Church of England was very similar to the Catholic liturgy. And when Edward VI comes onto the throne, we have a more reformed liturgy. Tallis was one of the first church musicians to write anthems set to English words, although Latin continued to be used alongside the vernacular. So two examples of this period is one, Hear the Voice and Prayer, which the choir sang last Sunday, and then probably the most famous of Tallis's pieces, If You Love Me. And I'm gonna attempt to play that, see if this one works. And this is the King Singers, and you can sing along.
If ye love me, keep my commandments, and I will pray the Father, and I will pray the Father.
Yay!
Yeah, so that is probably Tallis's most famous piece, "If Ye Love Me," because it's sung by. Oops. Peter, is that you? Yeah. Oh,
Oh, yeah, I was singing. I didn't know I was unmuted. All right.
no, sorry. I think that was my YouTube going crazy with the next video. So, okay. As I said, that's Tallis's most famous piece because a lot of choirs sing that. It's not that difficult to sing, and but note the style. First is in English. Second, is almost one note per syllable rather than a ton of notes in the stratosphere like the earlier style that we heard. So if you didn't know this, that this was written by the same person as the first piece that we heard, you would think, oh, this is completely, different. But this is actually the same composer, just adapting to what the needs of the church were at that time. And so it's really interesting to really observe the difference in style. And then we're going to see that it shifts back when the next monarch comes in. These sorts of pieces sung in English with one syllable each where the choir is going to sing one of these each week during Lent. So kind of be on the lookout for that.
Did he write secular music at all? Or this is all?
For the most part, he did not. Some composers did, like madrigals and other things, but most of what we have from Tallis is sacred. The next monarch is Queen Mary, who had a 5-year reign, and she restored the Catholic rite. Notice the kind of titles that Tallis was writing in, back to Latin. This piece that we're going to hear an excerpt of is about 17 minutes long, Gaude Gloriosa Dei Mater, and then a very extended Mass for Christmas, Puer Natus est Nobis. So here the difference between what we just heard and this piece in 6 parts by Tallis, Gaude Gloriosa. And I'm just going to fast forward a little bit. Okay, so that's about the first 3 minutes of this 16-minute piece. But you can see, once again, it's going back to a different style of writing. Very elaborate, very florid, lots of notes per syllable, Latin, extended work. So you can tell that the needs of the church have been changing when Queen Mary ascends to the throne, and Tallis responds to that. Most days now, people really don't sing these pieces because they're not very practical. So you'll hear "If You Love Me," but you won't ever hear this unless it's in a concert. And then finally, there's one more monarch.
Are you saying countertenors aren't in demand much?
True. Yeah. Yeah. And that's also got to remember that the countertenor range, which the countertenors were in vogue, during Tallis's lifetime because women were not allowed to sing in church choirs. So it was boys singing the top line, the soprano line, all that really high stuff. And then men would sing the alto, tenor, and bass, whereas today the women sing soprano and alto. And the range of the countertenor goes almost as high as a female alto, but the countertenor can go lower too than a female alto can because the male voice generally can sing lower too. So some of this music is not suited for today's voices because he wrote it for a countertenor range, which may be a little bit like this, and the female alto range may be like that. So some of the notes that he wrote for down here aren't as natural to sing. So a lot of different reasons why you don't really hear that music as much, except for groups like the Tallis Scholars and the 16. Elizabeth I came to the throne in 1558, and she was the one that really established the Book of Common Prayer. Composers resumed writing English anthems, although the practice continued of setting Latin texts among composers employed by Elizabeth's Chapel Royal. So both Tallis and Byrd continued to write in Latin, and you'll see here, this is just a very small sampling of what he wrote during this time period, but he has Archbishop Parker, Psalter, the third mode melody, which we'll listen to in just a second. Tallis's canon, which we heard at the very beginning, probably the hymn that everybody knows. We sing the doxology to it. And then two pieces in Latin, the Lamentations, which is a group of pieces, words of Jeremiah, and this huge piece called Spem in Alium, which we will hear a short bit of. So I want to play first the third mode. And this piece goes on to inspire a lot of other composers that we'll talk about after we hear it. So.
This hymn tune, composed by Tallis for a collection made by the first Anglican Archbishop Matthew Parker, may be familiar.
That hymn is in our hymnal, and it's one of 8 or 9 little short pieces that Tallis wrote setting the words of Archbishop Parker, who the guy said was the first Anglican archbishop. And that melody goes on to inspire a lot of different composers, including Ralph Vaughan Williams, who we'll talk about in a few weeks, Herbert Howells. And that, if you have ever heard of the orchestral piece Fantasia on a theme of Thomas Tallis, that is the theme that Vaughan Williams sets his wonderful Fantasia to. So that seems like a very simple hymn, but it goes on to really inspire a lot of different people. And that was written during this last period in Tallis's life when he was working for Queen Elizabeth. Now, another piece that he wrote during this time is called Spem in Alium. And this piece is famous, actually it's infamous because it is for 40 parts. So normally a choir is made up of 4 parts, soprano, alto, tenor, and bass. But this piece is made up of 40 parts, and it's 8 choirs of 5 parts each. So it's 8 choirs of, I think it's soprano, alto, tenor, baritone, bass. And you hardly ever hear this performed. It's one of those extreme pieces of music because it requires so many forces. So I want to play you a little bit of it so that you can kind of get a sense of it. It's also a very long piece, about 8 or 9 minutes long, but I'll just play the kind of last 2 or 3 minutes of it. So it's quite an unusual piece, and as you can see, it requires a lot of forces. The full score is like this big, so just to get the music is pretty difficult. But this is a piece that Tallis wrote later in his life. Not sure why. It may have been written for a special occasion, but kind of one of those infamous pieces. And you may have run into this in the past if you ever kind of follow what happens in various museums. There is an exhibition that someone has put together of this piece, and they took a recording and split it into 40 different tracks, 40 different voices, and they assigned one speaker to each of those voices, and they put the speakers around the room. And so you can walk around a room. I think I went to one in London where they had all these speakers and you could listen to individual voices. So it's almost like you're experiencing this piece, but it's all through just an exhibition. And let me show you a picture of it. So do you see how there are 40 speakers? This is at the MoMA in New York, and they play the piece nonstop all day, and you can just walk in and out and listen to the different sopranos or altos from each choir. And it's a pretty neat thing. It's an exhibition that has gone around the world, and I'm trying to get Rob Cross to bring it here for the Virginia Arts Festival, or even better yet, have a live performance of it, maybe at the Chrysler Museum or something like that. But it requires a big room and a lot of forces, and it's not easy to sing, but it may be a fun thing to do. So that's basically all I have to talk about. Let me show you one more picture, and that is Tallis memorialized in stone. This is at the Royal Albert Memorial in London, right across from Royal Albert Hall. And Tallis is the one right in the middle holding this large piece of parchment or paper, maybe a nod to the fact that he had control of the paper back when Queen Elizabeth gave him and Byrd the monopoly. But he's among other great composers. On his right is Beethoven, and Gibbons is on the left here. Henry Lawes and Henry Purcell is on the corner. So Thomas Tallis, highly regarded father of church music, and he went on to influence a lot of composers during his lifetime and afterwards. And later we'll see when we come to the English Romantics that he was a big force there too. There was a movement called the Tudorists, which in the beginning of the 20th century, a lot of English musicians were turning back to the Tudor era to get their inspiration. And so we see that Thomas Tallis is really kind of the central driving force behind all of that. And it's good to start this series off with him. Three other people I want to note. Today is the birthday of George Frederick Handel, who was born in 1685. So this is after Tallis, but he and Bach and Scarlatti were all born in 1685. And also a musician called John Blow, who was the predecessor to Henry Purcell. He was the organist at Westminster Abbey. He was also born on this day. And on this day in 1983, Herbert Howells died. So a lot of activity on February 23rd. We're going to talk about Howells later on, but I wanted to mention that because that's all today. Anyone have any questions or comments, or what's your story about Tallis, or what have you learned about him that you may not have known?
Well, it's I love that the Vaughan Williams piece, and I didn't realize that that tune was woven in there. I can replay it in my head now. It's in one of those real soaring parts of that piece. I can
If
listen to
if
that.
you listen to it, yeah, now that you know that, if you listen to the Vaughan Williams piece, you'll hear it all the way throughout. It's everywhere.
Yeah. And do you have the, are most of these called motets? Is that what they're called?
Yeah, motets or anthems. I don't, there may be a technical definition for each, but I was always thought that motets were like in Latin and anthems were in English, but that might be too too defining. I think most of the time you can just call them anthems or motets.
And do you have any idea where they were placed in the liturgy? I presume they were somewhere in the liturgy.
Yeah, a lot of them are, a lot of the Latin are votive antiphons, which were sung during the offices. So this wasn't during the Eucharist. This was at Vespers or in Compline, and it was sung, you know, before the Magnificat or something like that. Back when they had time to stand around for 4 hours.
Yes.
So they, obviously they've got masses, so those were sung throughout the Eucharist, but a lot of these other ones had very specific places that they would be placed in the liturgy. Yeah, and Heather, you wrote that he weathered the changes of the monarchy well, but it's nice to see the timeline, yep, to make a concrete connection. It's interesting how, yeah, you kind of flip back and forth. It'd be interesting to do a comparison with him and Byrd, who also experienced a lot of the same turmoil, and see how he fared. Byrd also has a repertoire of Latin and English motets, but oftentimes we remember him best for the Latin works. And there's Peter.
Yeah, I've been working at the same time as listening to you.
We
Can't
couldn't
make out what you're
we
saying.
couldn't quite get that, Peter. Your connection wasn't very good.
So, okay, I think that.
Looks like you're at
It's
work
all
or
right.
something. Yeah.
That's right.
Well, it's good to see you.
Thanks.
All right. Well, if there's nothing else, I just wanted to let you know, I think next week we're going to talk about Ray Vaughan Williams. There's a session on Perry, Howells, and then the last week is on Judith Bingham and the contribution of female composers to the Anglican tradition. And I wanted to make sure that we had some representation, because that's becoming that should have been, but now is only now becoming more important and kind of kind of brought to the forefront. So I'm looking forward to researching that to share that with you. So, all right, well, it's good to see all of you. Thank you very much and have a good night.